The crack of a hand against her cheek echoed through the cramped back room of Hollister's general store, sending Josephine Owens stumbling backward until her spine collided with the rough wooden shelves. Pain blossomed across her face as Mr. Hollister loomed over her, his bushy eyebrows furrowed in rage. "How many times must I tell you, girl? Your job is to take inventory and stock shelves, not to question my bookkeeping." He raised his hand again, and Josephine flinched, the bitter taste of blood filling her mouth where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek. It was 1877 in Mineral Point, Wisconsin, a once booming lead mining town now struggling to find its footing as the mines dried up and settlers pushed further west. Josephine had only asked why certain items were being marked at double the price when sold to the local Menominee who occasionally came to town to trade. A simple question that had earned her this. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hollister," she whispered, her trembling fingers reaching up to touch her reddened cheek. At 22, Josephine had learned to keep her head down in the 3 months she'd worked at the store, but sometimes her curiosity got the better of her. The daughter of a schoolteacher, she'd been raised to seek knowledge, to question the world around her. Her father had encouraged her inquisitive nature before consumption had taken him 2 winters ago. "Sorry doesn't stock shelves," Hollister spat. "Get back to work or find employment elsewhere. And good luck with that. No one else in this town will hire a woman who can't mind her tongue." He stormed out, leaving Josephine alone with her throbbing face and wounded pride. She sucked in a deep breath, straightening her simple brown dress before returning to the storeroom. The tears stinging her eyes remained unshed as she methodically counted boxes of ammunition, jars of preserved fruit, and sacks of flour. She would not give Hollister the satisfaction of breaking her spirit. When her shift ended at sunset, Josephine collected her meager wages and slipped out the back door, avoiding Hollister's watchful gaze. The evening air was cool against her skin as she made her way through the town's dusty streets toward the small room she rented from Mrs. Finch, a widow who lived on the edge of town. "Josephine," a familiar voice called out as she passed the post office. Emma, the postmaster's daughter and Josephine's only friend in Mineral Point, hurried toward her, letters clutched in her gloved hands. Her smile faltered as she drew closer. "Good heavens, what happened to your face?" "Nothing of consequence," Josephine replied, turning slightly to hide the mark. "Hollister again?" Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "Joe, you can't keep working for that brute." "I haven't much choice, Em. The room at Mrs. Finch's won't pay for itself." Josephine adjusted the worn shawl around her shoulders. "Besides, I've endured worse." Emma's kind eyes filled with sympathy. "Father mentioned a cattle drive coming through tomorrow. Maybe there'll be work at the hotel or restaurant while the Cowboys are in town. Extra help is always needed when those rowdy men arrive." Josephine nodded, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Perhaps Emma was right. Perhaps another opportunity would present itself. As they parted ways, Josephine continued her walk home, her thoughts drifting to the possibilities that tomorrow might bring. She'd come to Mineral Point after her father's death, fleeing the memories that haunted their small Illinois farmhouse and the persistent advances of the neighboring farmer who had decided a young, orphan woman would make a suitable wife. She had no intention of trading one form of subjugation for another. The next morning brought the distant sound of cattle lowing and men shouting. Josephine rose early, donning her best dress of faded blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother and pinning her thick chestnut hair into a modest bun at the nape of her neck. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, a purplish stain that told the tale of her insolence. She made her way to the hotel first, then the restaurant, and finally the saloon, but found no one willing to hire her. Whether it was the mark on her face that made her unsuitable for serving customers or the whispers that Hollister had surely spread about her questionable character, doors closed before she could fully state her case. By midday, Josephine found herself at the edge of town where the cattle drive had stopped to rest. The smell of dust and livestock filled the air as cowboys moved among the herd, their voices carrying on the wind. She stood at a distance, watching the organized chaos, wondering if there might be work to be found here, perhaps cooking or mending. As she contemplated approaching the chuck wagon, a commotion erupted near a group of men gathered by a large oak tree. A cow had broken free from the herd and was charging toward a young boy who had wandered too close. Without thinking, Josephine rushed forward, snatching the child and pulling him aside just as the animal barreled past, its hooves missing them by inches. "Danny!" a woman cried out, running toward them and clutching the boy to her chest. "Thank you, miss. Thank you." The boy, no more than 5, stared up at Josephine with wide eyes. "That was brave," he said, his voice filled with childish admiration. Before Josephine could respond, a tall figure approached, his spurs jingling with each step. She looked up to see a man in his late 20s with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore the dust of the trail on his clothes and a worn leather hat that had seen better days. "That was quick thinking," he said, his voice deep and clear. "You all right, madam?" Josephine nodded, suddenly conscious of her bruised face. "Yes, I'm fine. The boy." "He's well, thanks to you," the man replied, his gaze lingering on her injury before returning to meet her eyes. "Name's Zachary O'Brien. Most folks call me Zach." "Josephine Owens," she replied, extending her hand out of habit before quickly withdrawing it, remembering her place. Ladies didn't shake hands with strange men, especially not cowboys. But Zach caught her hand anyway, his grip firm but gentle. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Owens." His eyes again flickered to her cheek, a question in them that he didn't voice. The woman with the child thanked Josephine again before hurrying away, leaving her alone with Zach. An awkward silence fell between them. "Are you with the drive?" Josephine asked, gesturing toward the cattle. "Trail boss," he confirmed with a nod. "Taking these beasts to Chicago. Stopping here to rest and restock before the final push." His eyes hadn't left her face. "If you don't mind me saying, looks like someone got heavy-handed with you." Josephine instinctively touched her cheek, then lowered her hand. "I asked a question my employer didn't appreciate." Something darkened in Zach's eyes. What kind of man hits a woman for asking a question? "The kind who owns the only general store in town and knows I need the work," she replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Zach seemed to consider this for a moment. "Well, Miss Owens, if you've got questions, you can ask me anything you like. I promise to answer with kindness, not the back of my hand." The sincerity in his voice caught Josephine off guard. Men in her experience were not typically known for their patience with inquisitive women. Her father had been the exception, not the rule. "That's very kind, Mr. O'Brien, but I doubt you'll be in town long enough for me to take advantage of your generous offer." 3 days, he said. "Time enough for the cattle to rest, and for my men to enjoy some comforts of civilization before we continue east." He paused, studying her. "Are you looking for work, Miss Owens?" Hope fluttered in her chest. "I am actually. Do you need help with the drive?" Zach chuckled, the sound warming something inside her. "Not with the cattle, no. But our cook broke his arm 2 days back, and while he can still direct the cooking, he could use an extra pair of hands. Pays fair, and you'd have a place at our fire for meals." Josephine hesitated. Working with a group of cowboys wasn't exactly respectable employment for a single woman, but the prospect of escaping Hollister's heavy hand was tempting. "Just for the 3 days you're in town." 3 days here, Zach confirmed. "After that, well, we could use help all the way to Chicago if you've a mind to travel. No pressure, though. 3 days' work is 3 days' wages either way." The idea of leaving Mineral Point sent a thrill through her. Chicago, a big city with opportunities far beyond what this small mining town could offer. But could she trust this man, this stranger with kind eyes and gentle words? "I'd like to accept your offer for the 3 days," she said carefully. "As for Chicago, I'll need to think on it." Zach smiled, and Josephine couldn't help but notice how it transformed his weather-worn face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Fair enough. Can you start now?" Cookie's likely cursing up a storm trying to knead dough with one good arm. For the first time in months, Josephine felt a genuine smile tug at her lips. "I can start now." As Zach led her toward the chuck wagon, Josephine couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter might change the course of her life. Whether that change would be for better or worse remained to be seen, but for now, the prospect of 3 days free from Hollister's tyranny was enough. The chuck wagon sat a short distance from the main herd, a fire already burning beside it. An older man with a grizzled beard and his right arm in a makeshift sling glanced up as they approached, his bushy eyebrows rising at the sight of Josephine. "Cookie, this is Miss Josephine Owens." She's going to help you out while we're in Mineral Point, Zach explained. Cookie looked her up and down, his expression skeptical. Can you cook, girl? Yes, sir. I've been preparing meals since I was tall enough to reach the stove, Josephine replied, standing a little straighter. Humph. Cookie gestured to a mound of dough on a wooden board. Then start by finishing that bread. 20 men'll be wanting supper in a few hours, and these biscuits won't make themselves. Josephine nodded, removing her shawl and rolling up her sleeves. As she began to work the dough with practiced hands, she was acutely aware of Zach watching her. You need anything else, Miss Owens? He asked. Josephine, please, she said, focusing on her task. And no, I believe I can manage. Zach tipped his hat. Josephine it is. I'll leave you to it, then. Cookie may be ornery, but he's fair. You'll be treated well here. As he walked away, Cookie snorted. Been on 16 drives with that boy. Never seen him take such an immediate shine to anyone. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm simply here to work, Mr. Just Cookie, the old man interrupted. Everyone calls me Cookie. Have for 30 years. He eyed her bruised cheek. Whoever did that to you deserves a meeting with the business end of my skillet. Despite herself, Josephine laughed softly. I believe you mean that. Damn right I do, Cookie muttered. Now, let's see what you can do with those biscuits. For the next several hours, Josephine worked alongside Cookie, preparing a hearty stew, biscuits, and an apple cobbler with supplies from the wagon. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way that stocking shelves never had been. As the sun began to set, cowboys drifted toward the fire, drawn by the aromas wafting from the cooking pots. Zach returned as the men began to line up, each with a tin plate and cup. He stood back, watching as Josephine ladled stew and handed out biscuits, her movements efficient despite her unfamiliarity with the routine. When the last cowboy had been served, Cookie nudged her. Fix a plate for yourself and the boss. I'll watch the fire. Josephine did as instructed, carrying the food to where Zach had settled on a fallen log at the edge of the firelight. He looked up as she approached, taking the plate she offered with a grateful nod. Join me, he asked, gesturing to the space beside him. She hesitated only briefly before sitting, maintaining a respectable distance. The stew was hot and flavorful, and Josephine realized how hungry she was. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The men seemed pleased with supper, Zach commented, breaking the quiet. Cookie says you've got a natural touch with cooking. High praise from such a discerning gentleman. Josephine replied with a small smile. Zach chuckled. He's rough around the edges, but he knows his business. He paused, studying her in the flickering light. May I ask you something, Josephine? She tensed slightly, her spoon pausing halfway to her mouth. You did offer to answer my questions with kindness. I suppose it's only fair I extend the same courtesy. What brought you to Mineral Point? You don't strike me as someone who's spent her whole life here. It was an innocuous question, yet Josephine found herself hesitating. Her story wasn't particularly unique or interesting, but it was personal. Still, something about Zach's direct gaze invited honesty. My father was a schoolteacher in Illinois, she began, setting her plate on her lap. After my mother died when I was 12, it was just the two of us. He taught me everything he knew: reading, writing, mathematics, history. He believed women deserved education as much as men. A fond smile touched her lips at the memory. When consumption took him 2 winters past, I had few options. A neighbor offered marriage, but it was not a situation I wished to enter. Understanding flickered in Zach's eyes. He wasn't offering out of affection. No, Josephine confirmed. He wanted someone to keep his house and bear his children. I wanted more than to be a convenient solution to his domestic needs. She sighed, looking into the fire. I came here because I had a distant cousin who offered me a place to stay. She passed 6 months after I arrived in Influenza, and I've been making my own way since. Working for a man who doesn't hesitate to strike you for speaking your mind, Zach said, a hardness entering his voice. It was employment, Josephine replied simply. Not many options for a woman alone. Zach was quiet for a moment, watching the flames dance. My mother was a curious woman too, always asking questions, reading whatever books she could find. My father adored that about her, said her mind was as beautiful as her face. He smiled at the memory. They had a good marriage. Taught me that a partnership between equals is worth striving for. Josephine studied him, this cowboy with his thoughtful words and gentle manner. He didn't fit the mold of the rough trail hands she'd observed from afar. And yet you chose a life on the trail rather than settling down. For now, he agreed. My parents left me a small ranch in Colorado. Been working drives to save enough to build it proper. Another year or two, and I'll have what I need to make something of it. He glanced at her. What about you? What future are you working toward? The question caught her off guard. Josephine had been so focused on survival that dreams of the future seemed like luxuries she couldn't afford. I suppose I haven't thought that far ahead, she admitted. Each day has been about making it to the next. That's no way to live, Zach said softly. Everyone should have something to look forward to, something to work toward. Before Josephine could respond, one of the cowboys approached, hat in hand. Boss, got a situation with some of the younger steers. Might need your eye. Zach nodded, rising to his feet. Duty calls. Thank you for the conversation, Josephine. And the excellent meal. As he walked away, Josephine found herself watching him, wondering at the strange connection she felt to this man she'd just met. It was foolish, she knew, to feel any attachment to someone passing through. In 3 days, he would be gone, continuing east to Chicago with his herd, while she would remain in Mineral Point with her bruises and her questions. Yet as she gathered the empty plates and returned to help Cookie clean up, she couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to leave this town behind, to see Chicago, to perhaps find a place where curiosity wasn't met with violence. That night, as Josephine walked back to Mrs. Finch's boarding house, her mind was filled with possibilities that hadn't existed that morning. Sleep, when it came, brought dreams of open prairies and a pair of storm-gray eyes. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Josephine rose early, penning a brief note to Mr. Hollister informing him that she would not be returning to his employment. It was reckless, perhaps, to burn this bridge before she was certain of her next steps, but the memory of his hand against her cheek and the contrast with Zach's kind words made the decision easier than it might have been. She delivered the note before making her way to the cattle drives camp. The men were already up and moving, some tending to the herd, while others performed various camp duties. Cookie greeted her with a gruff nod, already stirring a pot of oatmeal over the morning fire. Thought you might not come back, he remarked as she set down her small bag of personal items. I said I would help for 3 days, Josephine replied, reaching for an apron hanging on the wagon. I keep my word. Cookie's weathered face cracked in what might have been a smile. Good quality in a person. He gestured to the coffee pot with his good arm. That needs tending. Men'll be wanting their morning brew soon enough. Josephine set to work, finding comfort in the routine of meal preparation. As the cowboys began to line up for breakfast, she searched the faces for Zach, but didn't see him among them. Boss rode into town at first light. Cookie informed her, noting her wandering gaze. Said something about supplies and business to attend to. Josephine nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in her chest. It was foolish to feel let down by the absence of a man she barely knew. The morning passed quickly as she helped Cookie prepare for the midday meal. Around noon, as she was kneading dough for the evening's bread, a shadow fell across the workstation. Looking up, she found Zach standing before her, his hat in his hands. Good morning or afternoon, I suppose, he greeted her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Mr. O'Brien, she acknowledged, brushing flour from her hands onto her apron. Cookie said you had business in town. I did, Zach confirmed. Wanted to speak with you about it, actually. Got a moment? Curious. Josephine glanced at Cookie, who waved his hand dismissively. Go on. Dole'll still be there when you get back. Zach led her a short distance from the chuck wagon, stopping beneath the shade of a large oak tree. His expression was serious as he studied her face. I paid a visit to Hollister's store this morning, he said without preamble. Josephine's breath caught. Whatever for? Wanted to see the man who thought it acceptable to strike a woman for asking questions, Zach replied, his voice deceptively calm. Had a few words with him. Alarm shot through Josephine. What did you do? Nothing that would get me arrested, Zach assured her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Just made it clear that his behavior toward you was noticed and not appreciated. You had no right, Josephine said, her voice rising slightly. That was my situation to handle. Perhaps, Zach conceded. But seeing that mark on your face and knowing the cause, I couldn't simply do nothing. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I apologize if I overstepped. I meant only to ensure he understood that you weren't without allies in this town. The anger that had flared in Josephine's chest began to subside. No one had stood up for her since her father's passing. It was a strange feeling to be defended, to matter enough that someone would confront her abuser. What exactly did you say to him? She asked, curiosity winning out over indignation. A small smile played at Zach's lips. I might have suggested that treating employees with dignity tends to be better for business than creating rumors about one's violent temper, and that if I heard of him raising a hand to another woman, I'd ensure every rancher and cowboy from here to Colorado knew which store to avoid when passing through Mineral Point. Despite herself, Josephine felt a laugh bubble up from her chest. The image of Hollister confronted by this tall cowboy, all quiet intensity and implied threats, was oddly satisfying. I imagine he didn't take that well. About as well as a cat takes to water, Zach confirmed, his smile widening. But I think he understood the message. They stood in silence for a moment, the sunlight filtering through the oak leaves dappling the ground between them. Josephine found herself studying Zach's face, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Thank you, she said finally. Though I still maintain I could have handled the situation myself. I don't doubt that for a moment, Zach replied. You strike me as a woman of considerable fortitude. But sometimes it's nice not to have to fight every battle alone. Something warm unfurled in Josephine's chest at his words. I should get back to the bread, she said, suddenly flustered by the intensity of his gaze. Of course. Zach stepped aside, allowing her to pass. One more thing, Josephine. She paused, looking back at him. Yes. Have you given any thought to continuing on with us to Chicago? The question hung in the air between them. Had she thought about it? She'd thought of little else since his offer the previous day. The prospect of leaving Mineral Point, of seeing Chicago, of perhaps finding opportunities in a city where a woman with a mind of her own might not be so out of place, it was tempting beyond words. I have, she admitted, but I'm not sure it would be proper. Zach's expression grew serious. I understand your concern. A woman traveling with a group of cowboys might raise eyebrows. But I assure you, my men are respectful, and your reputation would be safeguarded. Cookie's presence provides a measure of propriety, and I give you my word that you would be treated with nothing but respect. His earnestness was touching, but Josephine had lived long enough to know that a woman's reputation was a fragile thing, easily shattered and nearly impossible to restore. It's not just about propriety, she said carefully. It's about what comes after. Chicago is a big city, unfamiliar to me. What would I do once we arrived? Where would I go? I have connections there, Zach replied. Friends who could help you find respectable employment and lodging. You wouldn't be alone. He took a step closer, his voice lowering. I'm not asking you to trust blindly, Josephine. I'm asking you to consider that there might be more for you out there than what Mineral Point has to offer. The sincerity in his eyes made it difficult to doubt him. Still, caution held her back from agreeing immediately. I need time to think, she said finally. This isn't a decision to be made lightly. Zach nodded, respect in his gaze. Take all the time you need. We won't leave for 2 more days. As Josephine returned to her bread making, her thoughts were in turmoil. The prospect of leaving with Zach and his men was both exciting and terrifying. It would mean abandoning the security of the familiar, however unpleasant for the unknown. Yet something in her yearned for more than what this small town could offer. That evening, as the cowboys gathered around the fire after supper, one of the younger men produced a fiddle from his saddlebag. Soon, the air was filled with lively music, the men clapping and stomping in time. Josephine watched from her place by the chuck wagon, smiling at their enthusiasm. Not much for dancing. Zach's voice came from beside her, making her start slightly. I haven't had many occasions for it, she admitted, watching as 2 of the cowboys linked arms and spun in a clumsy circle, drawing laughter from their companions. Then perhaps tonight is a good time to remedy that, Zach said, extending his hand to her. May I have the honor? Josephine hesitated, glancing at the men around the fire. I'm not sure it would be appropriate. It's just a dance, Josephine, Zach said softly. Nothing improper about enjoying a bit of music under the stars. Perhaps it was the warmth in his eyes, or the infectious joy of the fiddle music, or simply the desire to feel something other than worry and fear for once. Whatever the reason, Josephine found herself placing her hand in his. Zach led her toward the firelight, keeping a respectful distance as they began to move in time with the music. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer for a man who spent most of his life on horseback. As they circled the fire, Josephine felt lighter than she had in years, the rhythm of the music and the firm guidance of Zach's hand at her waist creating a bubble of happiness that seemed to exist outside of time and circumstance. When the song ended, transitioning into a slower, more melancholy tune, Zach drew her slightly closer, though still maintaining a distance that couldn't be considered scandalous. In the flickering light of the fire, his eyes were intense as they held hers. "You're thinking too much," he said quietly, a small smile playing at his lips. "A habit I've never been able to break," Josephine replied, matching his tone. "What questions are running through that curious mind of yours right now?" She considered deflecting, but his open expression invited honesty. "I'm wondering why a man like you would take an interest in a woman like me." Zach's smile widened, the dimple in his cheek making a brief appearance. "A man like me? Successful? Respected?" Josephine shrugged slightly. "You could have your pick of women, I imagine. And what makes you think I'd prefer anyone to the woman who rushes to save a child from danger, who works without complaint beside a cantankerous old cook, who bears the mark of injustice yet retains her dignity?" Zach's voice was low, meant only for her ears. "You undervalue yourself, Josephine Owens." Heat rose to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. "You hardly know me." "I know enough to want to know more," he replied simply. "Isn't that how all connections begin? With curiosity and the desire to learn?" As they continued to dance, Josephine found herself wondering if perhaps Zach O'Brien was right. Perhaps there was more to life than merely surviving from one day to the next. Perhaps there was room for curiosity, for connection, for the kind of partnership he had spoken of when describing his parents' marriage. When the music finally ended and the men began to retire to their bedrolls, Zach walked Josephine to the edge of camp. The night air had grown cooler, and she wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "I should get back to Mrs. Finch's," she said, reluctant to end the evening. Zach nodded, his expression thoughtful. "May I escort you?" The offer was tempting, but Josephine shook her head. "The walk isn't far, and I know the way well enough. Besides, it will give me time to think." "About Chicago?" Zach asked, a hopeful note in his voice. "About many things," she replied with a small smile. "Good night, Mr. O'Brien." "Zach," he corrected gently. "Sweet dreams, Josephine." As she walked back to her rented room, Josephine's mind was a whirl with possibilities. The evening had been unlike any she could remember, filled with music, laughter, and the unexpected warmth of connection with a man who seemed to see beyond her circumstances to the woman beneath. Mrs. Finch was still awake when Josephine entered the small house, sitting in her rocking chair with her mending. The older woman looked up, her eyebrows rising at the flush in Josephine's cheeks. "Well now, looks like someone's had a pleasant evening," she observed, setting aside her work. "That cattle drive bringing some excitement to your life, is it?" Josephine couldn't help the smile that curved her lips. "It's just temporary work, Mrs. Finch. Nothing to get excited about." The widow hummed skeptically. "And I suppose that handsome trail boss has nothing to do with the sparkle in your eyes?" Heat flooded Josephine's face. "Is it that obvious?" Mrs. Finch chuckled, the sound warm and knowing. "Only to someone who's lived long enough to recognize the signs. He seems a decent sort, from what I've heard in town." Josephine hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Mrs. Finch, what would you think if I told you I was considering leaving Mineral Point?" The older woman studied her for a long moment before replying. "I'd think you were a young woman with sense enough to recognize opportunity when it presents itself." She sighed, her gnarled fingers resuming their work with the needle. "This town hasn't been kind to you, Josephine. There's a wider world out there that might offer more than a mean-spirited shopkeeper and the gossip of small-minded folk." "They're heading to Chicago," Josephine said, sitting on the ottoman near Mrs. Finch's feet. "Mr. O'Brien, Zach says he has connections there, people who could help me find proper work." "And do you trust him?" Mrs. Finch asked, her eyes sharp despite her advanced years. Josephine considered the question carefully. Did she trust Zachary O'Brien, a man she'd known for barely 2 days? Logic said it was too soon, too risky to place her future in the hands of a near stranger. Yet something deeper than logic, an instinct she couldn't quite name, whispered that he was a man of his word. I believe I do, she said finally. He's been nothing but kind and respectful. Mrs. Finch nodded slowly. Then I think you have your answer, my dear. Sometimes life presents us with crossroads, and we must choose a path knowing we can never return to that exact moment of decision again. She reached out, patting Josephine's hand. For what it's worth, I think you've the strength to make your own way, with or without this cowboy's assistance. But having a friend along the journey never hurts. That night, as Josephine lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, she found herself making mental lists of the reasons to stay in Mineral Point versus the reasons to leave. The column for staying was pitifully short: familiarity, the security of the known. The column for leaving grew longer with each passing minute: opportunity, adventure, the chance to see a great city, to perhaps find work that engaged her mind as well as her hands. And if she were honest with herself, Zach O'Brien occupied a significant portion of that second column. Not just the man himself, though his kindness and respect were certainly appealing, but what he represented: the possibility of connection, of being valued for her curious mind rather than punished for it. As sleep finally claimed her, Josephine's decision was forming like a crystal in clear water, slow but inexorable. The next morning, she arrived at the camp earlier than usual, finding Cookie already at work preparing breakfast. The old cook glanced up as she approached, a knowing look in his rheumy eyes. Made up your mind yet? He asked without preamble. Josephine blinked in surprise. About what? Don't play coy with me, girl. About coming with us to Chicago. Cookie snorted, stirring the pot of bubbling oatmeal. Boss has been like a cat on hot bricks since you left last night, wondering what you'll decide. A small smile tugged at Josephine's lips. Has he now? Never seen him this worked up over a woman before. Cookie confirmed. Not that I blame him. You're a rare sort: hard-working, quick-witted, and easy on the eyes to boot. He pointed his spoon at her. So what'll it be? Staying in this backwater town, or taking a chance on something new? If I were to come along, Josephine said carefully, would it cause problems? A woman traveling with a cattle drive isn't exactly conventional. Cookie shrugged his good shoulder. Convention's overrated. Besides, I could use the help with this busted arm, and the men appreciate food that doesn't taste like it was cooked in a boot. His expression softened slightly. The boys respect the boss. If he says you're to be treated with courtesy, not a one of them will step out of line. As they worked side by side preparing the morning meal, Josephine felt a sense of peace settling over her. By the time Zach appeared, hat in hand and a question in his eyes, her decision was made. Morning, he greeted, his gaze searching her face. Sleep well? Well enough, she replied, handing him a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending a small thrill up her arm that she did her best to ignore. I've been thinking about your offer. Zach's expression remained carefully neutral, though something hopeful flickered in his eyes. And I'd like to accept, Josephine said, the words bringing a sense of finality and rightness. If the invitation still stands, I'd like to continue on to Chicago with your drive. The smile that broke across Zach's face was like sunrise after a long night, warm, bright, and full of promise. The invitation absolutely stands, he confirmed. You won't regret it, Josephine. I promise you that. I'll hold you to that promise, Mr. O'Brien, she replied, unable to keep from returning his smile. Zach, he corrected again, his eyes crinkling at the corners. If we're to be traveling companions, I think we can dispense with the formalities. Zach, Josephine agreed, finding she liked the way his name felt on her lips. Then you must call me Joe. Most of my friends do. Joe, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. It suits you: simple, strong, and memorable. A throat clearing behind them reminded Josephine that they weren't alone. Cookie stood watching them, an amused expression on his weathered face. If you two are done making eyes at each other, there's work to be done. Those cowboys won't feed themselves. Zach laughed, the sound rich and unrestrained. Always practical, Cookie. He turned back to Josephine. I'll leave you to your duties. We'll talk more later about the arrangements for departure. As he walked away, Josephine felt a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. The future stretched before her, uncertain but full of possibility. For the first time in years, she was choosing her path rather than merely accepting what fate had dealt her. That afternoon, Josephine returned to Mrs. Finch's to pack her few belongings and pay the remainder of the month's rent, despite the widow's protests that it wasn't necessary. As she folded her dresses and the few keepsakes she'd brought from Illinois, a knock came at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Mrs. Finch. Instead, Emma entered, her eyes wide with concern. "Is it true? You're leaving with the cattle drive?" News traveled fast in small towns. Josephine shouldn't have been surprised that her decision was already common knowledge. "Yes," she confirmed. "They're heading to Chicago tomorrow." Emma sat on the edge of the bed, watching as Josephine continued to pack. "But Joe, traveling with a group of men? What about your reputation? What about it?" Josephine countered, more sharply than she intended. Softening her tone, she continued, What reputation do I have to protect here? I'm the woman who questions too much, who refuses to know her place. The daughter of a schoolteacher who thinks herself above her station. That's not fair," Emma protested. "People respect you." "Some do," Josephine acknowledged, thinking of Mrs. Finch and Emma herself. "But most see me as an oddity at best, a troublemaker at worst. In Chicago, I could start fresh. No one there knows me or has decided what I should be." Emma was quiet for a moment, absently tracing the pattern on the quilt covering Josephine's bed. "Is it because of him? The trail boss?" Josephine paused in her folding. "Partly," she admitted. "He's offered me work, connections in the city. And that's all." Emma pressed, a knowing look in her eyes. "What more should there be? We've only just met. Yet you're leaving everything familiar to follow him to Chicago," Emma pointed out. "That suggests something more than a mere employment arrangement." Josephine sighed, sitting beside her friend. "I don't know what it is, Em. He's different. He listens when I speak. He values my questions rather than punishing them." A small smile touched her lips. "He told me I could ask him anything and he'd answer with kindness, not the back of his hand." Emma's expression softened. "That does sound refreshing after Hollister." She took Josephine's hand, squeezing it gently. "Just be careful, Joe. Men can say beautiful things when they want something." "I know," Josephine assured her. "I'm not walking into this blindly. If Chicago doesn't work out, or if Mr. O'Brien proves less honorable than he appears, I'll find my own way." She smiled at her friend. "I'm not without resources, you know. I can read, write, cipher, and cook. Those are marketable skills in a big city." Emma nodded, though concern still shadowed her eyes. "Write to me. Let me know you're safe." "Of course," Josephine promised, embracing her. "And who knows? Perhaps someday you'll visit me in Chicago." As Emma left, Josephine returned to her packing with renewed purpose. She was making the right decision, she felt it in her bones. Whatever awaited her in Chicago, it had to offer more possibility than remaining in Mineral Point, trapped in a cycle of subservience and suppression. That evening, as she returned to the camp for her final night in Mineral Point, Josephine found Zach waiting for her at the edge of the firelight. He looked different somehow, freshly shaven, his usually dusty clothes brushed clean, his dark hair damp as if recently washed. "You look nice," she observed as she approached, immediately feeling foolish for stating the obvious. Zach smiled, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. "Thought I'd make myself presentable. Cookie says I usually look like something the cat dragged in." "Cookie exaggerates," Josephine replied, amused by his discomfort. "Though the clean-shaven look suits you." "I have something for you," Zach said, reaching into his pocket. "A token of appreciation for your help these past days, and perhaps a good omen for our journey." He extended his hand, revealing a small carved wooden bird resting on his palm. It was a delicate thing, each feather meticulously detailed, the grain of the wood catching the firelight in warm honey tones. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed, carefully taking it from him. "Did you make this?" Zach nodded, a pleased expression crossing his face at her reaction. "Whittling passes the time on long drives. The men tease me for it, but I find it relaxing." Josephine turned the carving over in her hand, marveling at the craftsmanship. "What kind of bird is it?" "A meadowlark," Zach replied. "They're common in Colorado, where my ranch is. Beautiful singers first to greet the morning, last to bid farewell to the day. He paused, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. My mother used to say they were symbols of joy and new beginnings. The significance of the gift wasn't lost on Josephine. A new beginning, that's exactly what this journey represented for her. Thank you, she said softly. I'll treasure it. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Then Cookie called from the fire that supper was ready, breaking the spell. As they joined the others for the evening meal, Josephine was aware of a shift in the atmosphere. The cowboys treated her with a new level of respect, no longer viewing her as a temporary helper, but as a traveling companion for the journey ahead. They included her in their conversations, sharing stories of past drives and adventures on the trail. Later, as the fire burned low and most of the men had retired to their bedrolls, Josephine sat with Zach, planning the details of their departure the next morning. The wooden meadowlark rested in her pocket, a tangible reminder of the path she'd chosen. We'll leave at first light, Zach explained. It's about a 12-day journey to Chicago if the weather holds, and we don't encounter any serious problems. And once we arrive? Josephine asked, the reality of her decision beginning to settle in. What then? Zach's expression was earnest in the dim light. I have a friend who owns a respectable boarding house for working women. She'll have a place for you while you find your feet. And there's a restaurant nearby where I'm certain you could find employment. The owner, Mr. Danvers, is always looking for skilled kitchen staff. The thought and care he'd put into planning for her future touched Josephine deeply. You've thought of everything. I try to, Zach replied with a small smile. It's my job to consider all possibilities and prepare for them. And what about you? Josephine asked, curious about his own plans. After the cattle are sold, will you return to Colorado immediately? Something flickered in Zach's eyes, hesitation, perhaps, or uncertainty. I usually stay in Chicago for a week or so, seeing to business and enjoying the amenities of city life before heading back west. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I'd like to use that time to show you the city, if you're amenable. Help you get your bearings. The offer sent a pleasant warmth through Josephine's chest. I'd like that, she admitted. Chicago seems overwhelming from what I've read about it. It can be, Zach agreed. But it's also exciting, full of life and possibility in a way that smaller towns can't match. His gaze held her steadily. A bit like you, actually. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. Now you're just flattering me. Not flattery if it's true, Zach countered, his tone light, but his eyes serious. You're wasted in a place like Mineral Point, Joe. A curious mind needs room to grow, questions to explore. His understanding of her fundamental nature was uncanny. Josephine had never met someone who seemed to see her so clearly, who valued the very aspects of her character that others found troublesome. You should get some rest, Zach said, noting the lateness of the hour. Tomorrow will be a long day. As Josephine made her way back to Mrs. Finch's for her final night in the small room that had been her home for the past months, she found herself filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was leaving behind everything familiar to embark on a journey with a man she barely knew, toward a city she had only read about in newspapers and books. Yet despite the uncertainty, there was a rightness to her decision that she couldn't deny. For the first time since her father's death, Josephine felt as if she were moving toward something rather than simply running away. The wooden meadowlark in her pocket seemed to carry the weight of promise of joy and new beginnings, just as Zach had said. Whatever awaited her in Chicago, whatever developed between her and this unusual cowboy with his gentle words and thoughtful gestures, Josephine was certain of one thing. She would never again accept being silenced for asking questions. Dawn broke clear and cold over Mineral Point. Josephine rose with the first light, donning her warmest dress and wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her few possessions fit easily into a single carpet-bag: clothes, her father's Bible, a small leather-bound journal, and now, nestled carefully among her belongings, Zach's carved meadowlark. Mrs. Finch was waiting in the kitchen, a basket covered with a checkered cloth on the table before her. For your journey, she explained, pressing it into Josephine's hands. Just some bread and preserves, and those molasses cookies you're fond of. Touched by the gesture, Josephine embraced the older woman. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Finch. Your kindness has meant more than I can say. The widow patted her back affectionately. You write when you reach Chicago, you hear? Let an old woman know you've arrived safely. I promise, Josephine assured her, blinking back unexpected tears. Despite the difficulties she'd faced in Mineral Point, there were people here she would genuinely miss. Emma had come to say goodbye as well, waiting outside Mrs. Finch's small house with red-rimmed eyes, but a brave smile. The friends embraced, promising to write regularly, though both knew that distance had a way of stretching such promises thin over time. As Josephine made her way toward the cattle drive's camp, the town was just beginning to stir. A few early risers paused to watch her pass, curiosity and judgment in their gazes. Near the general store, she caught sight of Hollister, his face darkening as their eyes met briefly. But for once, Josephine felt no fear at his glare, only a quiet satisfaction that she would never again have to endure his cruelty. The camp was a hive of activity when she arrived, men breaking down tents, loading the chuck wagon, and readying the herd for travel. Cookie greeted her with a gruff nod, directing her to store her bag in the wagon alongside his cooking supplies. Boss was looking for you, he informed her, jerking his thumb toward where the horses were being saddled. Said to send you his way when you arrived. Zach was checking the cinch on a dappled gray mare when Josephine approached. He looked up, a smile breaking across his face at the sight of her. You came, he said, as if there had been some doubt. I said I would, Josephine replied simply. That you did. His expression grew serious as he gestured to the mare. This is Pepper. She's steady and gentle, a good mount for someone who might not have much riding experience. Josephine blinked in surprise. I'm to ride, unless you'd prefer to walk to Chicago, Zach teased. At her uncertain expression, he softened his tone. The chuck wagon is full of supplies, and riding will be more comfortable than perching on the hard bench beside Cookie all day. Can you ride? It's been years, Josephine admitted, eyeing the mare with trepidation. My father kept a horse when I was younger, but since his passing, Pepper will take good care of you, Zach assured her, patting the mare's neck. And I'll stay close, at least until you get your confidence back. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Josephine deeply. Zach seemed to anticipate her needs before she was fully aware of them herself. Thank you, she said, reaching out to stroke the mare's velvety nose. She's beautiful. Like her rider, Zach replied, the words escaping before he seemed to realize what he was saying. A flush crept up his neck as Josephine's eyes widened at the compliment. I mean, that is, thank you, Josephine said again, saving him from his embarrassment. A small smile played at her lips as she turned her attention back to the horse. Hello, Pepper. I hope we'll be good friends. Zach cleared his throat, regaining his composure. We'll be moving out in about 20 minutes. Do you need help mounting? The question brought a fresh wave of uncertainty. Josephine glanced down at her dress, which was hardly suitable for straddling a horse. I'm not exactly dressed for riding, she pointed out. All right. Zach looked momentarily chagrined. I should have mentioned there's a split riding skirt in one of the saddlebags. Cookie's last helper left it behind. Might be a bit large, but it should serve until we can find something more suitable. Josephine retrieved the garment, ducking behind the wagon to change. The heavy canvas skirt was indeed several sizes too large, but with some creative tucking and a length of rope as a belt, she managed to make it workable. When she emerged, Zach's approving glance sent a pleasant warmth through her despite the morning chill. With his help, she mounted Pepper, adjusting to the sensation of sitting astride after so many years. The mare stood patiently as Josephine arranged her skirt and found her balance. Comfortable? Zach asked, handing up the reins. I think so, Josephine replied, though her thighs already protested the unfamiliar position. I'll manage. Zach nodded, seeming to understand the determination behind her words. We'll take it slow today. No need to push too hard at the start. As the drive prepared to move out, Josephine took one last look at Mineral Point in the distance. The town where she had sought refuge after her father's death, where she had endured hardship and loneliness, but also where she had found the courage to begin anew. For better or worse, it had been a chapter in her life, one that was now closing as another began. The first day on the trail was a lesson in endurance. Despite Zach's assurance that they would take it slow, The pace of the drive was steady, and by midday, Josephine's muscles were screaming in protest. She gritted her teeth against the discomfort, determined not to complain or show weakness. Zach rode beside her for much of the morning, offering quiet advice on her posture and grip on the reins. His patient instruction helped ease some of her discomfort, though nothing could completely alleviate the soreness of unused muscles being put to work after years of inactivity. When they stopped for the midday meal, Josephine nearly fell as she dismounted, her legs like jelly beneath her. Zach was there instantly, his strong hands steadying her. "First day's always the hardest," he said sympathetically, keeping his arm around her waist as she found her footing. "It gets easier, I promise." "I'll hold you to that," Josephine replied, wincing as she took a step. "I'm not sure I'll be able to climb back into the saddle this afternoon." "You don't have to," Zach assured her. "You can ride in the wagon if you prefer." Pride warred with practicality in Josephine's mind. She didn't want to appear weak or incapable, but the thought of several more hours in the saddle was daunting. "Perhaps just for today," she conceded. "Until I get my trail legs, as you cowboys might say." Zach's smile was warm with approval. "No shame in knowing your limits, Joe. That's not weakness, it's wisdom." His words eased some of the frustration she felt at her body's betrayal. As she helped Cookie prepare the simple midday meal, she found that movement, however painful, helped loosen her stiff muscles. By the time the drive was ready to continue, she had reconsidered her decision. "I think I'll try riding a bit longer," she told Zach as he came to help her into the wagon. "If I'm going to get used to it, I need to push through the discomfort." Surprise and admiration flickered across his face. "Are you sure? It's a long afternoon ahead." "I'm sure," Josephine confirmed, squaring her shoulders despite the protest of her aching back. "Besides, the view is better from horseback than from inside that dusty wagon." Zach chuckled, offering his hand to help her mount. "Can't argue with that logic. But promise you'll tell me if it gets to be too much. No need to suffer unnecessarily." The afternoon was indeed a test of endurance, but Josephine found that as the miles passed, her body began to adapt to the rhythm of Pepper's gait. The discomfort didn't disappear entirely, but it became manageable, a background sensation rather than an overwhelming distraction. As they rode, Zach told her about the land they were passing through, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of previous drives. His deep voice was pleasant to listen to, the cadence of his speech as steady and reassuring as the mare beneath her. "Have you always been a cattleman?" Josephine asked during a lull in his narration. Zach shook his head. "My father was a rancher, but he wanted more for me. Sent me back east for schooling when I was 14. Had notions of me becoming a lawyer or banker." A wry smile touched his lips. "I lasted 3 years before the call of open country got too strong to ignore. Came back west and never looked east again." "Your parents weren't disappointed?" "My mother understood," Zach replied, his expression softening at the memory. "She said some men are born with horizons in their blood. My father took longer to come around, but eventually, he accepted that I was cut from the same cloth as him, despite his attempts to pattern me differently." "And now you're building your own ranch," Josephine observed. "Trying to," Zach confirmed. "It's not easy. The land is challenging, water scarce in summer, winter's harsh. But there's something about creating something from nothing, about watching a herd grow and thrive under your care." He glanced at her, curiosity in his gaze. "What about you? If circumstances had been different, what would you have chosen to do with your life?" The question caught Josephine off guard. Few people had ever asked about her aspirations, assuming that marriage and motherhood were the only acceptable ambitions for a woman. "I think I would have liked to teach," she said after a moment's consideration. "Like my father." There's something wonderful about opening young minds to new ideas, watching understanding dawn in a child's eyes. Zach nodded, seeming to truly consider her answer. "You'd make a fine teacher. You have patience and a natural way of explaining things. I noticed it when you were helping young Jimmy with his reading last night." Josephine blinked in surprise. "You saw that?" "I see a lot of things," Zach replied with a small smile. "The boy's been carrying that book for 3 drives now, too proud to admit he can barely make out the words. You got him reading a whole page in one sitting." The memory warmed Josephine. Jimmy, one of the younger cowboys, had been struggling with a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans. She'd offered to help, guiding him through the difficult passages. "He's smart," she said. "Just needs someone to show him the patterns and the words." "That's what I mean," Zach said, his eyes holding hers. "You have a gift for it. Perhaps in Chicago, you might find opportunities to use that gift." The possibility hung in the air between them, a future beyond just survival, a life where Josephine might contribute something meaningful, might fulfill the potential her father had always seen in her. It was a heady thought. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Zach called for the drive to make camp near a small stream. Josephine dismounted with his assistance, her muscles protesting anew after the long hours in the saddle. Still, there was a sense of accomplishment in having completed her first day on the trail. "How are you feeling?" Zach asked as he helped unsaddle Pepper, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Like I've been dragged behind the horse rather than riding atop it," Josephine admitted with a rueful smile. "But proud, too. I wasn't sure I could manage a full day." Zach's expression was warm with approval. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Joe. Most folks would have been in the wagon by mid-morning." As they worked together to brush down the mare, Josephine found herself studying Zach's profile in the golden light of approaching sunset. The strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that hinted at a long-ago break, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, these details were becoming familiar, comforting in their consistency. "What?" Zach asked, catching her gaze. Heat rose to Josephine's cheeks at being caught staring. "Nothing. Just, thank you for giving me this chance." His expression softened, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You don't need to thank me, Joe. If anything, I should be thanking you for taking a risk on a dusty cowboy and his wild proposition." The way he said it, with gentle humor masking what seemed like genuine gratitude, made Josephine's heart flutter in her chest. This connection between them was growing stronger with each passing hour, evolving from cautious respect to something that felt dangerously like affection. That evening, as the cowboys gathered around the fire after supper, Josephine found herself drawn into their camaraderie more fully than before. They treated her as one of their own, now a fellow traveler on the long road to Chicago, sharing stories and laughter as the stars emerged overhead. Jimmy, the young cowboy she'd helped with his reading, shyly asked if she might assist him again. As they bent over his book, sounding out words by firelight, Josephine felt Zach's gaze on them from across the flames. When she glanced up, the warmth and approval in his eyes made her heart skip a beat. Later, as the men began to settle into their bedrolls, Zach showed Josephine where Cookie had arranged a small private area for her at the back of the chuck wagon. A canvas tarp had been rigged to provide shelter and a modicum of privacy. "It's not much," Zach apologized, "but it's the best we can manage on the trail." "It's perfect," Josephine assured him, genuinely touched by the consideration. "Thank you for arranging it." Zach hesitated, seeming reluctant to leave. "Sleep well, Joe? Tomorrow will be easier, I promise." As she watched him walk away to his own bedroll at the edge of the camp, Josephine felt a curious mix of emotions: gratitude, yes, but also a longing that she wasn't quite ready to name. Crawling into her makeshift bed, she pulled the blankets around her against the night chill, the events of the day replaying in her mind as sleep claimed her. The days that followed fell into a rhythm, each one slightly easier than the last, as Josephine's body adapted to life on the trail. The soreness in her muscles faded to a dull ache, then to a familiar tightness that she came to associate with the satisfying fatigue of hard work. Her hands, once soft from indoor labor, grew calloused from handling reins and helping with camp chores. Her skin darkened under the persistent sun despite the wide-brimmed hat Zach had found for her. She worked alongside Cookie during meal preparations, learning the efficient methods he'd developed over decades on the trail. The old man, for all his initial gruffness, proved to be a patient teacher, sharing stories of his adventures as they cooked together. "Been driving cattle since before you were born," he told her one evening as they stirred a pot of beans. "Seen just about everything the trail can throw at a man: stampedes, floods, bandits, you name it." "Have you ever thought of settling down?" Josephine asked, curious about the life choices that had led him to this nomadic existence. Cookie snorted. "Tried it once. Lasted 6 months before the walls started closing in on me." He stirred the beans thoughtfully. Some folks are born to roots, others to wheels. I'm a wheels man, through and through. And Zach? Is he roots or wheels? The old cook gave her a knowing look. That boy's roots, make no mistake. All this traveling, these cattle drives, it's just a means to an end for him. Been saving every penny to build something lasting on that Colorado land of his. The information aligned with what Zach had told her, yet hearing it confirmed by someone who had known him for years provided additional reassurance. Josephine was growing increasingly aware of how much she wanted to believe in Zach's integrity. In the future, he hinted, might be possible. In the evenings, after the day's work was done and supper had been cleared away, Zach often sought her company. They would sit slightly apart from the others, talking quietly as the fire burned down to embers. He told her about his ranch in Colorado, the vista of mountains visible from the ridge where he planned to build a proper house, the clear stream that ran through the western pasture, the wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in spring. It sounds beautiful, Josephine said one night, trying to picture the landscape he described so vividly. Peaceful. It is, Zach agreed, his voice soft with longing. Not as grand as some spreads, but it's good land with potential. Room to grow. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. Room for a family someday. The implication hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly, yet both aware of its presence. These moments of connection were becoming more frequent, the boundaries between employer and employee blurring into something more personal, more meaningful. On the 6th day of their journey, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening. Zach studied the sky with concern, eventually calling for an early halt to their day's travel. That's a bad one brewing, he explained as the men hurried to secure the camp and cattle. Best to find what shelter we can and wait it out. Josephine helped Cookie batten down the chuck wagon, securing pots and provisions against the coming wind. The air had turned heavy, charged with electricity that raised the fine hairs on her arms. In the distance, thunder rumbled like a warning. You stick close to the wagon when it hits, Cookie advised, eyeing the darkening sky. These prairie storms can turn nasty quick. When the rain came, it arrived with sudden violent sheets of water driven by howling wind that bent the prairie grasses horizontal. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, followed by thunder that Josephine could feel in her chest. She huddled beneath the wagon's canvas shelter, watching as Zach and his men worked to keep the frightened cattle from bolting. They were drenched within minutes, their slickers offering minimal protection against the deluge. Josephine's concern grew as she watched Zach move among the herd, his figure occasionally illuminated by lightning flashes. The cattle were restless, shifting nervously with each thunderclap. Shouldn't they come to shelter? She asked Cookie, who was securing a tarp that threatened to tear free in the wind. Cattle need watching in weather like this, the old man replied grimly. One good lightning strike could send them stampeding for miles. As if in response to his words, a massive bolt struck a lone tree not 50 yards from the herd. The resounding crack was instantaneous, and the effect on the cattle immediate. A ripple of panic moved through the animals, their low bellows rising to frightened bawls as they began to surge forward. Stampede, someone yelled, the word nearly lost in the storm's fury. Josephine watched in horror as the herd broke, hundreds of cattle suddenly in chaotic motion. The cowboys raced to flank them, trying to turn the leaders and prevent a full-fledged stampede. Through the curtain of rain, she saw Zach at the front, his horse running flat out alongside the lead steers. Will they be able to stop them? She asked, her voice tight with fear. Cookie's weathered face was grim. If anyone can, it's the boss. But in this weather. He didn't finish the thought. For what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes, Josephine could see nothing but rain and occasional glimpses of riders moving through the downpour. The thunder continued its assault, each crash sending a jolt through her body. Then, gradually, the frantic shouts of the cowboys changed in tone, becoming more controlled, directional. The rain began to slacken, allowing better visibility of the scene before them. The herd had been turned, their panicked run transformed into a wide circle that was slowly tightening as the cowboys guided them back toward camp. Relief flooded Josephine as she spotted Zach among the riders, still mounted, still in control. When the cattle were finally settled and the storm had passed, leaving behind a soaked landscape, and the fresh scent of rain washed earth, the men returned to camp. They were muddy, exhausted, but triumphant in having prevented disaster. Zach dismounted near the chuck wagon, his clothes sodden and his face streaked with mud. Despite his bedraggled appearance, his eyes sought Josephine immediately, as if confirming that she was safe. "Everyone all right here?" he asked, his voice hoarse from shouting commands above the storm. "We're fine," Josephine assured him, stepping forward with a dry towel she'd salvaged from the wagon. "You're the one who looks like you've been dragged through a river." A tired smile cracked through the mud on his face as he accepted the towel. "Feel like it too. But we didn't lose a single head, and no one was hurt. I count that as a victory." As the cowboys began the process of drying out and setting up camp anew, Josephine helped Cookie prepare a hot meal. The men needed warmth and sustenance after their ordeal. She moved among them, serving coffee and stew, noting the exhaustion in their faces and the way they nodded gratefully at her ministrations. When she reached Zach, who sat slightly apart from the others, she found him staring into the fire, his expression distant. He had changed into dry clothes, but his hair was still damp, curling slightly at his neck. "You should eat," Josephine said softly, holding out a bowl of stew. "Restore your strength." Zach looked up, something vulnerable in his gaze before he masked it with a tired smile. "Thank you," he said, taking the food. "Join me." Josephine settled beside him on the log that served as a makeshift bench. For a few minutes, they sat in companionable silence as Zach ate. The camp around them was quieter than usual, the men too weary for their typical evening banter. "I was frightened," Josephine admitted finally, her voice low, "when the lightning struck and the cattle bolted. I thought—" She paused, the words catching in her throat. Zach set down his empty bowl, turning to face her more fully. "It's part of the life," he said gently. "Cattle drives are never without risk. But my men are good at what they do, and we've weathered worse than today's excitement." "You were right in the thick of it," Josephine observed, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "At the front, where the danger was greatest." Something warmed in Zach's eyes at her obvious worry. "That's a trail boss's job. I wouldn't ask my men to take risks I wasn't willing to face myself." The answer was simple, matter of fact, yet it spoke volumes about his character. Josephine found herself studying his face in the firelight, the strong lines of it, the quiet determination in his eyes, the way exhaustion had etched temporary creases at their corners. "You're staring again," Zach noted, a hint of amusement in his voice. Josephine didn't look away this time. "I'm trying to figure you out, Zachary O'Brien. You're not like any man I've known before." "Is that good or bad?" he asked, his tone light though his eyes were serious. "Good," Josephine replied without hesitation. "Definitely good." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than perhaps she had intended. Zach's expression softened, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Joe," he began, his voice low and intimate. Before he could continue, one of the cowboys approached, reluctantly interrupting their moment. "Boss, sorry to bother you, but we've got a situation with some of the horses. That lightning spooked them pretty bad." Zach nodded, the trail boss reasserting himself over the man who had been about to say something potentially life-altering. "I'll be right there." As the cowboy moved away, he turned back to Josephine. "We'll continue this conversation another time." It was both a statement and a question, an acknowledgement that something significant had been interrupted but not forgotten. Josephine nodded, watching as he rose and followed his man to tend to yet another crisis requiring his attention. That night, as she lay in her makeshift bed listening to the occasional drip of water from the tarp above, Josephine found herself replaying the day's events. The terror of the stampede, the relief of seeing Zach safe, the moment by the fire when something had shifted between them, it all swirled in her mind, keeping sleep at bay. She was falling for him. The realization didn't come as a shock, but rather as a confirmation of something her heart had known for days. It was fast, perhaps foolish given the brevity of their acquaintance, but undeniable. Zachary O'Brien, with his quiet strength, his respect for her mind, his kindness in the face of adversity, had captured her heart in a way no man ever had before. The question now was whether he felt the same, and if so, what future could possibly exist for a cattleman with horizons in his blood and a woman who had only just begun to discover her own capacity for adventure.